Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Monday, July 28th, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Thank you for joining me this fine Monday morning. Hope your week's getting off to a wonderful start. I hope Mondays are a challenge for many of us. Not so much anymore. Sometimes I'm ready to get back and get going with everything, but had a really good weekend. Good weekend for the Gamecocks, picking up a commitment. And this is kind of the final week of the speculation and list season. Hopefully, thank God, is coming to an end, right? In college football, because it's about to get real with practice. And that's always a good time of the year, especially now with all the different subjects that we have to talk about with playoffs, conference debates, realignment got thrown on us last week with the North Carolina Clemson thing. That was not as fun as sometimes it's more fun to talk about a big picture topic like that than it is to talk about who the backup at linebacker is going to be for a certain team. But not these days, man. I'm ready to talk about the backup linebacker. I'm ready to get on the plane and go to Atlanta in about 5 weeks, less than 5 weeks now after yesterday. So 5 weeks from today, around this time of morning, the wife and I will be heading back to the airport to get back home. That's not going to be a fun security line that morning, especially if the game does not go the Gamecocks' way against Virginia Tech. But I think Carolina will be okay in that game. We'll obviously talk it to death between now and kickoff and see how everything evolves. But certainly, like this time of year, it's a lot easier to do the job and not have to come up with topics and stuff because they naturally flow. They naturally flow into the coffers of coffee or the coffers of the show or wherever you catch me. We do have the morning show coming up later. Mike Morgan, co-host on Mondays. John Whittle on all things on Mondays. Today is Birdies with Beamer Day, and that's part of why it's a chipper good day because that event is usually you got SEC media days, then there's some vacations that take place for the next couple of weeks, and then boom, here we go with Birdies with Beamer. The assistant coaches are out there to talk to the media. I think you get to talk to just about all of them. Alex is out there. He's playing. Hale McGranahan's playing. I saw Hale was in a foursome with Connor Shaw. That's good. That's a good deal there, right? A lot of other Gamecock celebrities will be out there playing golf. I think it's a Cobblestone. That ends around 2 p.m. So right after we get off the show, be sure to log on to thebigspur.com because we'll have plenty of coverage on all of that. Beamer will talk. The assistant coaches will talk. Everybody else is there will talk as well. So that's always a good day. Saw they had Chick-fil-A breakfast out there for the assembled media before they go and sweat buckets because I saw the temperature down in Columbia, and it's something else. Don't worry, it's hot all over the country. It's July, so that's to be expected. In addition to the coaching staff over the weekend, that's interesting. I guess I did not know this. Geoff Collins, who most recently was the D coordinator at North Carolina, was the head coach at Georgia Tech and the head coach at Temple, has coached in the SEC at Florida as a D coordinator, at Mississippi State as a D coordinator, where he had the psycho defense. They called it the psycho defense. I always thought that was kind of cool. But he coached under Dan Mullen there when they had that great team with Dak Prescott back in 14. Mississippi State was number one in the country for a while. And so, yeah, he's kind of been around. Had coached at Alabama for Nick Saban, coached at UCF under George O'Leary. Good recruiter, and is a guy that will help with the linebackers, I'm assuming, because that's his position. And you have Clayton White there too. It used to be called an analyst, but now analysts can coach. So like he's a senior defensive assistant. So like Mike Shula last season was a senior offensive assistant. So Geoff Collins will be a senior defensive assistant. I'm assuming he'll help with recruiting whatever else is asked of him. I did not know this, but looking back, because I was trying to figure out where the connections were, and there is a connection. Shane Beamer and Geoff Collins both were graduate assistants. The very first year Beamer was coaching in 2000, after he was the long snapper for the 99 national runner-up Virginia Tech Hokies. Uh, they were both at Georgia Tech under George O'Leary back in 2000. Then, of course, Beamer went on to Tennessee for, I think, 4 years, '01 to '04, '03, '03, 3 or 4 years under Fulmer. Went on to Mississippi State. So they both have been at Mississippi State. I'm sure they've stayed in touch through the years. Geoff, I don't know him that well. I know of him. And I think when he was a personnel guy at Alabama and I was at Rivals, I think we exchanged emails at one point. But anyway, that's all I know of him. Of course, I followed his career from afar. I thought as a head coach at Georgia Tech, it was mission impossible for what he was left by Paul Johnson. I've talked about that through the years. I thought, you kind of made a deal with the devil when you were Georgia Tech and hired Paul Johnson. That guy just was not going to care about, anything but putting players in position to run his system. Now, that won 50 to 70% of the games because Georgia Tech won while he was there, but it left the roster in shambles. And Geoff Collins obviously tried to dig him out of it. He ended up getting fired. Brent Key's doing a fantastic job there at Georgia Tech. Phil Steele said Tech was a dark horse to get back, and I think ACC football. Not that we're all sitting around cheering for that league to be great, but I think ACC football is better when Georgia Tech's good. There's no reason why they shouldn't be good. They are historically a winning program. Just from Atlanta, so there's probably some recruiting connections there, and he kind of made his bones as a recruiter. That's kind of what he's known for. So, and if you look at, I don't know how much South Carolina's actually done this, but if you look at Clemson, Dabo is sort of sending. He sends Ben Boulware on the road, so because you can do that, you can only send so many on the road, but you can name whoever you want to get out there and go to high schools. I don't know how much Geoff Collins is going to be doing that, but it's possible that he could help in that regard. And I think the more experience you have on your staff, the more voices you have that have been around the block a little bit. Philosophically, the defensive philosophies with Clayton White and Geoff Collins are similar, very aggressive style, creative, that kind of thing. I know at North Carolina, you had the James Madison game that, oh, wow, obviously nobody wants that kind of outcome anywhere at South Carolina, but he's not going to be running the defense. So I think it would be a different conversation if so. But Geoff Collins, senior defensive assistant at the University of South Carolina, another addition to the coaching staff, and that's good. Big personality there too. So I dig it. I dig it. The Gamecocks picked up a commitment from Kosi Barnes over the weekend from Greensboro Grimsley. We had a special podcast about that. You can check out on the Inside the Gamecocks podcast channel and on YouTube. Kind of just broke it down for about 18 minutes, something like that. Not a very long one, but dug into him, really watching his feet and his hands and length and all that. There's some things, obviously, he's not a ready to go guy, but he can get stronger. Obviously, the strength and conditioning program, and down the road, I think he can be pretty good. He's a late riser, and that's a lost art these days, or those guys kind of slip through the cracks. They end up at different places from like Memphis on down sometimes, and those are the guys that get back in the portal in a couple of years that you get, and you're like, man, this guy's really good. And so big pickup, another North Carolina prospect. That's 4 for this cycle, so 7 over the last 2 cycles, and another plus-size defensive back as far as height and length and things like that go. And really, the last 2 classes have been full of guys like that. And that kind of brings us to what we're going to talk about today, our main topic, if you will, and that is Torian Gray. So I wanted to dive in because, as I said, practice is about to start. We'll have topics daily on what's going on the roster and movement and practice reports and analysis and all that good stuff. So the big picture stuff here on coffee, be few and far between. Not saying it will never happen because sometimes there's just not. You need to get off topic a little, not off topic, but you get to kind of dig into some big picture analysis and things like that. But it'll basically be facilitated on the news of the day, the week, the month, the opponent, whatever you want, or whatever you could possibly ask for. How about that? With all that. But, Torian Gray, and I think everybody knows this. I'm not telling anybody something they don't know. We've talked about it before, what kind of asset he is to this coaching staff and to the program. And, I followed his career for a long time, covering recruiting. I helped start a Virginia Tech site in the mid 2010s for 24, early 2010s for 24/7 Sports. It's still there to this day, VT Scoop. But I kind of helped the guys get it going, and a lot of interactions with Hokie fans. And Torian Gray was there then, and even going back to the Rivals days early on in my career when I was just analyzing recruiters and good at position coaches, Gray was always up there. I think he's the best secondary coach in the country, or one of them. I think that what makes him great is his player development and eye for talent. And when you have a combination like that, it can really help. Because if you strike out on some of the higher rated players, you know what you're looking at, and you can go get guys that are maybe not so highly rated, and you can coach them up or develop them, and kind of how to get them there. And it takes knowledge, it takes psychology. I mean, it's not easy to develop players at the college level these days because most of them think they've already arrived, right? I mean, we kind of send that message with the NIL money and the star ratings before that. I always say that my industry did too good of a job, not knowing that this social media thing was going to come, and we created, hundreds of mini celebrities. And it's tougher to deal with a celebrity than someone that wants to be a celebrity. So that's it. And I'm not making a blanket statement there. I mean, obviously, when you watch college football, there's enough dudes that get it, and there's really more that get it than don't. But my point is, it's not like it used to be, and it's not easy. It's not as probably never was easy because you're always dealing with young people, but it's not as easy as it once was. It's more difficult than ever to do that. And he's just done a fantastic job. I mean, you go back and look just since he's been here, start with Jalen Foster, a player from Burns High School, a school that's near and dear to my heart, was at Gardner Webb, transferred in as a walk-on. He starts and as a Walter Camp All-American. He's still on the coaching staff. I think he's got a bright future there. In 2021, you go on to 2022, and Cam Smith and Darius Rush. I mean, those guys. Darius Rush, he went back and forth early on when they recruited him, and they didn't know if he was a receiver, defensive back, settles in at corner, and then he's a draft pick, by the Colts. Cam Smith was highly rated. Cam Smith struggled a bit after redshirting, and then in 2020, and then Torian Gray got here. Cam started to come on at the end of 2020 during the Missouri game. We almost saw it happen live. I think he got beat on a play, and then the next play he picked it off, and then boom, light was on, and Cam Smith was Cam Smith for the rest of the time. Marcellus Dial was probably not on very many draft boards heading into 2023. He did get drafted by the Patriots. Player from Woodruff that the Muschamp staff placed at Georgia Military. They got him back in 2021 class. And certainly Marcellus had some up and down times, but he was pretty good at the end. And then O'Donnell Fortune, who unfortunately did not get drafted, he got a lot better under him. And then let's take it to safety. I mentioned Jalen Foster, Nick Emanware. Nick was pretty good when he got in. I mean, he started as a true freshman, But, if you think about the 2022 season, Eamon Moray and DQ Smith played a lot as true freshmen in the secondary, and they have ever since. DQ Smith converted quarterback, got him ready to go. Peyton Williams has answered the call when he's come in. At South Carolina, I mean, I'll throw Jelon Kilgore. How could I forget him? Jelon Kilgore, he's on some draft boards. As in, I think I wrote this a couple of weeks ago. I think Kilgore's pick against Bama that set up the field goal. That's one of the best plays, given the time and the timing of it in the game. The fact that he got out of bounds with a second to go, and the fact that it was Jalen Milroe and those receivers, and the break he made on the ball, and just, I mean, that was one of the best plays, I think, this decade of Carolina football. And it was so critical, too, because, Carolina got the touchdown, and they got the safety, and then they couldn't do anything with it. And then, boom, you come right back and you get a field goal. Carolina scored 19 straight points unanswered in that ball game against the Tide down there in that brutally difficult loss. That's the best way to describe that one. That was difficult. Lou Holtz said it was awfully difficult. But anyway, that was a great play. So think about that. I mean, just the secondary, don't get me wrong, under Will Muschamp, you had some good players back there. Safety was always a struggle. There's a lot of reasons for that, but Muschamp had pretty good corners. J.C. Horn comes to mind. Izzy McQuamu's a safety in the NFL. He was a corner at Carolina. Rashad Fenton obviously went to the NFL. Chris Lamons, those guys. So in my opinion, that was the defensive backs were still kind of being churned out, but now it's the whole thing plus a nickel because Clayton White plays 5 defensive backs, and you look at the depth now that they have coming back, plus you add in the coaching, and the secondary is in really good shape, as we've discussed. You kind of are sitting there wondering how you're going to get Cisse and Swain and Collier and Kilgore, all those guys on the field, because there's a log jam in a way there at nickel corner with Kilgore at the nickel, but Cisse can be a nickel. Yeah, we'll talk about that a whole lot, probably, because that's a good question. But this shouldn't surprise anybody, or it doesn't surprise me, because I mentioned Virginia Tech, but check out this list of guys at Virginia Tech. Now, I want to say something and bring up a blast from the past a little bit. He's at Clemson now, so I don't know if that changes your opinion of him or not. And I know as a coordinator, things did not end up well. But Lorenzo Ward, Whammy, was at Virginia Tech coaching for Bud Foster and Frank Beamer. And he put out some guys, Jimmy Williams, D'Angelo Hall, guys like that. So Virginia Tech had a pretty good go of it in the secondary. But Torian Gray actually replaced Whammy. Whammy went to the Oakland Raiders. And then ended up back, I think, at Arkansas when Ellis Johnson was there for like a month, and then was at Arkansas for a year under Petrino, and then followed Ellis to South Carolina, and then Ellis left for Southern Miss, and Whammy was the D coordinator here for the rest of the time under Steve Spurrier. But yeah, he's at Clemson now as an analyst like Geoff Collins, so working for Dabo Swinney, and he was last year too. But so Torian Gray replaces Whammy in 06. J-Ron Holsey, boy, I remember him as a recruit. He's out of Florida, really good. Macho Harris, Victor Macho Harris, one of those 757 kids, stud. Cam Chancellor, who the Seahawks loved, and then they got Cam Chancellor 2.0 and Nick Eamon-Warray, a big guy. Brandon Faison, this was a kid, and I didn't understand why South Carolina didn't go on him, and I believe it may have been before Whammy got back, and we may have been in the Ron Cooper area. He was from Georgia, like Atlanta. I want to say Lovejoy. Maybe it's not. It may not be Lovejoy. Maybe it is Lovejoy. It was one of those areas east or west of Atlanta, and he was a 3-star guy. about 6 foot, but he could run very fast. Had him at Nike 4.4 guy. Um, and he came in around the same time as some other dudes, that were pretty good. Like Kendall, I think Kendall Fuller was maybe the same time. I don't know. Faison and Fuller, I think, played together. Anyway, Faison was a heck of a player. I think Virginia Tech may have beaten Georgia Tech on him or something like that. But he was out of Georgia and really good. Kendall Fuller was a straight up from Maryland. His family had all gone to Kyle, his brother, all those folks had gone to Virginia Tech, and he was a 5-star guy, played like a 5-star guy, absolutely a 5-star guy, and an NFL draft pick. They got Keyshawn Jarrett out of Pennsylvania. He was a guy that, recruiting, I think we ended up with him at 4 stars, but we were like, yeah, I don't know what Penn State and these other schools are thinking. Great player. Brandon Flowers, great player. Chuck Clark was kind of later, 4-star guy, I believe, out of either 757 or Richmond. It was during the time I had the Virginia Tech site. I think Shane Beamer recruited Chuck Clark too, but a great athlete, NFL. Terrell Edmonds, this guy was a linebacker, and they moved him back to strong safety in the NFL. Um, and then, another big dude that maybe some don't talk about a whole lot from back in the day. He's I believe, a politician now from the 757 Virginia Beach area. Aaron Rouse, he was 6'4", 233 and a safety. So the Nick Eamon thing, the height thing, all that was going on. That's been going on 20 years with Torian Gray. Because this dude was 6'4", 233 and a baller. Aaron Rouse. Um, and so there is a long track record there of taking guys, both highly rated and not highly rated, and turning them into studs. And Virginia Tech was like that every single year. I think when you look at this year's Virginia Tech team, since it's relevant because the Gamecocks are about to play them here in 33 days, I can't really say the secondary looks like it did. Now, they were good last year back there, but 2 of their guys left and went to LSU. I think they had another guy drafted. So there's DBs in Virginia. I mean, especially over in the 757 area and in Richmond. But and really at Virginia Tech, there's a Georgia mixed in here. There's a Maryland mixed in here. There's a PA mixed in here. They kind of went Florida with J. Ron Holsey. They went all over the place to kind of cherry pick. But a lot of these kids are Virginia kids. But, I don't know about their secondary this year. If I think about like what part of their defense maybe, you know, I, I don't think is highly on as far as the portal guys they got and replacing what they did last year. It's probably there. I think the Hokies this season will be fine at defensive line and linebacker. Their front's going to be fine. I just don't know about the secondary because, those were some ballers. And I'm not sure they got, I think on the D line, you got some dudes that have made some statements at some other places, plus returners. But on the back end, it's a mystery. Maybe they're really good. I don't know. I mean, it's a different era of Virginia Tech football in many ways. But while he was there, Torian Gray, they were outstanding. He goes to the Redskins, and then, like a lot of coaches in the NFL, you get caught up, you get fired with the rest of the guys. Ends up at Florida, and when he left, I mean, Florida's secondary, his last year was 2020. They ended up they weren't that good that season as a whole, but he was kind of, I don't know, working. He wasn't a coordinator, that kind of thing. I think it was Todd Grantham was maybe the D coordinator there at the time, and he's a Virginia Tech guy too. And I don't know. I think he was a scapegoat. They weren't really sad to see him go to South Carolina. The Gator fans, that's a bunch that, kind of, I don't know. Those folks. If you ever want high comedy when Florida's losing, and you're a all access VIP member of the bigspur.com, head on over to the Swamp 247 message board. It is you'll never think a Gamecock game thread on a message board is out of control ever again. If you just do that. And I don't know that all Florida fans are like that. I'm friends with a lot of them, but they're an interesting bunch. And so he left, came to South Carolina with Shane, and the rest is history. I think I don't know how many secondary coaches Florida's had since then, or maybe they've had the same. I know they had, obviously they changed um, secondary coaches after Mullen got fired, but who knows? But Torian Gray, those couple of years at Florida, and even then, like you had some players that he did a good job with down there. I mean, just from an individual standpoint, Marco Wilson obviously was well, I think that's the kid that threw the shoe in 2020 against LSU, but good player. Trey Dean was a player the Gamecocks under Muschamp recruited as a safety. T-Rob and those guys, they ended up backing off, ended up not wanting him at the end. He ends up, I think Florida made a late push and got him. And I thought, they kind of moved him out to corner after he played what's called the star, which is like the nickel in that scheme. And I thought he played really well at cornerback. So, yeah, I mean, there's signs sometimes. And sometimes you hire a coach and it's all about what kind of recruiter he's been and all that. And, I think that in college football, because we've done it for 20 years, it's another one of those things we have to adjust to because as we've seen, and has always been the case, sometimes your best recruiters, especially at like South Carolina, are guys that have really probably never done it. Sterling Lucas is a good example of that. So is Mike Fury. Mike Fury, the biggest college job he's had is Marshall. And I think it's because they come in kind of hungry and things like that and sort of get after it and, embrace it. Whereas if you have maybe a coach that's been at a place where the logo kind of recruits, it's a little bit different debate there, an argument. Um, and I think that's always been that way to a certain extent. We just probably didn't talk about it enough because you have recruiter rankings and numerical things and all that. And then today, the personnel director is running the show. I mean, Darren Usher is if I wish we could put like his name beside every recruit because he has just as much to do with it as the position coach does. But oftentimes, we still do that. I do it too. I look at coaches coming in, like I talked about Geoff Collins earlier. I was like, good recruiter, help out there, and it is important for your position coaches and your assistant coaches to be able to recruit and to work at it. I mean, there's no question about that. But, the personnel guy is the one, and the head coach in the case of South Carolina is the one that's kind of, helping it along as well. It's not the days of the rock star position coach recruiter. And there were some guys like that couldn't coach a lick, but they were on the staff. Not necessarily at South Carolina, but other places, he's the assistant tight ends coach. Okay, well, his job's to go out and sign 15 guys, and he's good at it. That doesn't happen anymore because your personnel guy is so involved and things like that. So all the NIL and expansion of coaching staffs and transfer portal has eliminated an entire cottage industry of only recruiters that get that. But sometimes we get excited more about the guys that have signed big names and things like that. But it's sometimes you got to look at the track record of developing players. And I think that we don't talk about that enough when coaches are hired. Travian Robertson, who is, getting commitments now that he's kind of gotten in there. And these days you also recruit very, very early. I don't know if that's good or bad for the sport and for recruiting, but, if you're a new coach coming in when Travian did in July, or I'm sorry, in June, you're going up against other coaches who have built 2-year relationships with high school recruits in many instances. And you inherited a recruiting board that particular cycle where you had three or four guys, and their choices all were South Carolina or Georgia, and Georgia's rolling then. Georgia's still rolling in recruiting. So that was tough. He signed Caleb Williams and Christian Ingram last year. Has anybody seen pictures of Christian Ingram? uh, yeah, done well in the portal, but still caught a lot of crap. Every time Carolina to lose a D tackle, Pierre D, is it time to start talking about Travian? Well, it's important to recruit your position well, but as I've said, there are other people working it. And then it's not always about, do they like your school or not? Yeah, South Carolina lost one kid simply because, and it's not the big names you would think, simply because, he thought, in his life situation, he had to take the most money possible. And he did, and Carolina wasn't going to overpay for a guy like that because it's, you know, I don't know. Don't want to get too much more into it. So yeah, things like that happen as well. So everybody got on Travian Robertson. But I thought Travian was a great hire. It wasn't because he played here. Wasn't because I covered his recruitment, which was interesting at the end because Clemson thought they were getting him, and that's why I don't ever say there's locks in recruiting because our Clemson site at Rivals said 100%. The next morning, that writer was on his way to Laurinburg, North Carolina, and called me and said, "Well, South Carolina's getting him." So there we go. And that was in '06, summer of '06. Taught me a lesson. Never, ever, ever, ever say there's a lock. When Rob Gronkowski committed to Arizona, Clemson thought they were getting him, and he had told them they were coming. They had pre-writes, and it was like a celebration on Tiger Illustrated. And I know because a friend of mine worked for Tiger Illustrated at the time and thought the same thing. And then the kid gets on ESPN and announces for Arizona. So, and it's happened to South Carolina before too, folks. I mean, it's one of those things where there's no locks. But I'll always remember Travian because that's what taught me in my career, no locks. And interviewed him several times, loved his family. Really a pleasure to deal with. I would say that even if he'd have opted for the other team, but thankfully he didn't. So I wasn't just high on the hire because of that. I was high on the hire because you look at Jordan Strawn at South Carolina pre-injury, and to be a former walk-on wide receiver, the guy was pretty dang good at pass rushing. In fact, one of the saddest things about the 2022 defense was when Mo Kaba and Jordan Strong got hurt against Arkansas in game two. That defense fought its butt off for the rest of the year, but they gave up some points. So, and then Strong came back in 2023 and wasn't the same. Um, Obviously, Travian's not coaching him here because he coaches just tackles, and Sterling Lucas has the edge or edge rushers or whatever they're calling it these days. But so there's that, and then you look at Tulane. He was there for a minute, and I've mentioned this before. They got to Kansas State, and K-State's not one of these teams that's not prepared to play. The Tulane beats them 17-10. The story of the game is the Tulane D-line just crushed their offensive line. And to me, you look at that, look at who's playing for Tulane on the D-line and all that good stuff, and it's like, well, man, that's a well-coached team. It kind of reminds me of his mentor, Brad Lawing. Brad Lawing could take, just like Torian Gray, the 5 stars and make them better, and he could take 3 stars and make them better. 2 stars back in that era. So that's why I was excited about getting him. I thought this is a guy at schools where you have to go coach. If you're going to beat Kansas State while you're at Tulane, you have to coach. You have to coach them up. And he's coaching under Willie Fritz, who's obviously moved on to Houston now, but is a tremendous coach. And he coached them up. At Georgia State, you have to coach them up and be resourceful. And I think, at South Carolina, obviously, you recruit blue chippers, and they have. Christian Ingram was a high 3-star. I think Caleb Williams was too. Kind of straddled that low 4-star range. I don't know what they were composite. This year Aiden Harris is top 60 player, top 70 player in the country. Noah Clark's a top 200 player in the country. They beat Georgia and Ohio State on Troy Pikes in the portal, former five-star Gabriel Brownlow Dindy. But then you also have, guys like Nick Barrett, who was a three-star veteran guy that you got to coach up. You got Monkel Goodwine, who was a top 100 recruit, but didn't play a lot at Alabama, and so I think that, and given the situation Travian inherited, and I didn't mean to get off on this subject, I just was more talking about Torian Gray, but it's similar because, I think that in 2023, Carolina was, and another one of the things we don't talk about enough, this is why the 3-3-5 worked well too. I mentioned Strong wasn't the same player in 2023. And then that other side, it was just JT Gear was hurt all year with a broken foot. You had Tyreek Johnson in his 6th year out there playing his butt off. Brian Thomas Jr. probably wasn't ready to go in and play down to down. The Carolina was pretty mediocre to bad at edge. That'll never ever win a bunch of games in the Southeastern Conference. And we were so focused on the O-line injuries, and then receiver outside of Xavier was kind of a revolving door. I don't think we really focused on defense, the edge situation, which obviously changed a great deal last year, and B, depth. They had no depth. I mean, Boogie and Tonka and TJ played this about the whole game. The secondary that season, they played the whole game. There's more depth now. But I think with Boogie and Tonka and TJ, it took them a year. There was no spring practice with Travian or anything. He came in and replaced Jimmy Lindsey, who was well liked. I think it was a feeling out period. And then we saw what happened last season, and we're hoping for the best this season. And so my point is, just like Torian Gray, who came in with a list of players sent to the NFL, right? And Travian's got 2 now, with Tonka and TJ getting drafted still early in his career. I look at that and I think that's like, that's to me a little more important, especially at South Carolina, where even if you are starting to recruit with the big boys, which they are to a certain extent, you're still going to have a lot of in-state players that you end up taking that are really good football players that will probably be difference makers for you that are going to need to be coached up. That's just life in South Carolina from a football recruiting standpoint. And so that's good that guys like Torrian Gray and Travian Robertson are on the staff. And so, anyway, and to conclude all this, Torian Gray is a great asset to this football program. I wanted to mention that and dive in today on it because, like I said, the season's about to start. And you kind of look at it, and most fans agree with me on this. But just to kind of break it down, I wouldn't worry. Like Tristan Lewis, kind of a guy that came out of nowhere. They beat Gardner Webb on. Not worried. If he gets in, he's coachable. He'll do it. They know what they're doing on the back end. And, who knows? Maybe Carolina can get back in that DBU discussion at some point, like they were there for a while. All right, folks. Don't forget the morning show is coming up with Mike and with Whittle on all things. The show with Phil and I, we got another great VHS dates from the 80s, sponsored by Gen X on Chief. And then we have the poll du jour, a Nana Sports chat box. You can get in the Nana Sports chat box by signing up for a membership right here on YouTube. $4.99 a month gets you access to all that. And I promise I'm not going to go on any rants for any people in the chat box, today. I wasn't too proud of that, but going back and listening to it, if I were just out there listening, it'd probably be funny. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. It's a little embarrassing sometimes. Anyway, JC Shurburtt's coffee is over. Holla.